Okay, in January 2013, I received my diagnosis of LH1+. I was scared, overwhelmed, and not sure where to turn. My doctor recommended that I attend the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation Symposium. Luckily for me, it was the first year that a special LH1 day was being hosted. In the weeks leading up to the event, Lissa Poincenot reached out to me up in Canada. She was infectiously warm, kind, and immediately wanted to connect me with others in the community. At the event, I was amazed by all the people who were chatting like old schoolmates. These were all the LH1 folks who Lissa had single-handedly gathered together from corners of the globe. She instantly helped me to belong to this new group during a very difficult time in my life. I was in awe to find out that this was the very first event and the first time that most of these people had ever met face-to-face. Lissa had worked diligently behind the scenes, building up an LH1 family where people could trust and belong. It was remarkable. Lissa Poincenot is an extraordinary gift to the LH1 community. She is an extraordinary wife, mother, friend, and colleague. She grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and had ties to Canada that started at a young age, when her family would drive to Windsor, Ontario, and dine at their favorite family restaurant. She then moved to New Jersey and college attended Princeton, where she studied international relations and politics. Interestingly, when she was at Princeton, one of her college friends was Nancy Newman, who would later become a well-known LH1 researcher. Following Princeton, Lissa went on to UCLA, where she obtained a master's in marketing and finance. Little did she know at the time the true power and purpose that her education held and what good use it would be put at the LHON Global Community Leader. She held a demanding corporate career in marketing while raising 3 kids, and then in 2008, LH1 struck her family. She made a conscious choice to be part of the solution and stepped forward and created the LH1 project for the UMDF and diligently built a vibrant community that supports the patients and families. She collaborated with world experts and fundraised and helped the enrollment in clinical trials. Above all, she often was the first person for families when they were reaching out for help with a diagnosis. Many of us know Lissa for her endless hard work and hours that she puts into coordinating and hosting the LHON Symposium at UMDF every year, and the woman who has built the foundation of the global LHON community. The relationships with patients, doctors, and researchers that she has built is priceless, because I think it has helped to advance the knowledge of LH1 in every way. I am proud to introduce a very dear friend of mine who makes LH1 rock, Lissa Poincenot.
Thank you, Lissa. And thank you to the LHON Canada team for asking me to attend this impressive inaugural event and to speak to you today about my LHON experiences and about LHON in a global context. This is a picture of my family. For those of you who can't see the photos, I'm going to try and remember to do a little photo description. As Lissa said, 10 years ago today, I'd never heard of LHON. A couple of months later, it completely turned my life upside down when the oldest of my 3 kids, Jeremy, was affected at age 19. Brain tumor, optic neuritis, MS, neuromyelitis optica. You may have heard some of these same possibilities. All were thought for a while to be the cause of Jeremy's sudden painless loss of central vision. First in one eye, then several weeks later the other. Eventually, LHON became the clear diagnosis. While Jeremy was the one who had to deal with the sudden vision loss and all that goes along with that, I was racing to stay one step ahead of his many needs: medical, education, transportation, friends, financial, so many issues I had no idea about. I remember thinking that I'd pretty much figured out how to be a mom of 3 teens, but I didn't have any idea how to be a mom of a blind kid, and I was somewhat terrified. At the same time, my daughter Julie and younger son Eric, who were 16 and 13 at the time, not only had to figure out how to engage with their suddenly legally blind brother, but also how to deal with the unpleasant reality that they were each at risk, just as they were heading into high school and college. And they were looking forward to taking part in the many environmental factors we've just been learning would only increase their risk of becoming legally blind like Jeremy, and that Julie would pass the mutation on to any children she might have one day. And my husband Leo wasn't sure what to do. He just wanted everything to be normal again, and it wasn't. Fortunately, we live in San Diego, not far from Los Angeles. And when I started reading articles about LHON, one of the authors on most of them had the name of someone in LA at a place called the Doheny Eye Institute, Dr. Alfredo Sadoun. During the early time following Jeremy's diagnosis, we saw him frequently. I brought a long list of questions to each visit, and Dr. Sadoun patiently explained new concepts to me in ways I could understand. Not only did we have the great good fortune to be able to tap into his vast knowledge about LHON, he welcomed us as colleagues in the fight against LHON, treating his patients as friends, not just as patients. And at first, that seemed normal. But the more I've been involved with rare diseases and heard from others who are working to fight other rare diseases about their challenges collaborating with medical leaders in their fields, the more I've treasured our great good fortune to have Dr. Sadoun working on LHON with us and for us. People need to realize that LHON is an emergency. It's not like so many other vision issues with a slow, gradual onset. It needs to be diagnosed quickly, and the patient needs good advice from an LHON expert about their best possible course of action given the current situation, and they need it as soon as possible after onset of vision loss. Even before then, if another family is affected, if possible. The old idea that there's nothing that can be done, either by carriers to reduce their risk or that there's no treatment options, it needs to be replaced with the more current information we've just been hearing. Most doctors don't know much about LHON and definitely aren't up to speed on what's happening today. Canada is so fortunate to have Dr. Rustam Kranja here in Ottawa, having spent the several years collaborating with Dr. Sadoun in LA and Dr. Claire Sheldon and others who are working on LHON. It's really fortunate to have folks like this around. Once I met Dr. Sadoun and felt I could resign my job as Jeremy's sort of LHON doctor, which I wasn't qualified for, but I had to do it. The next major challenge was to address the emotional impact of LHON. I found this image which shows sort of a journey of going down into an abyss and back up to the other side with some points along the way and circling along the way because it's not a clear path. And some of you may recognize how that felt because it really describes how I felt when Jeremy was affected. I just imagined that we'd been living our lives, everything was normal, and boom, we just got plunged into a canyon and emotionally. And my job was to get Jeremy up to the other side as quickly as possible with as few emotional bruises as possible. When it happened, he was a 19-year-old who was shocked, in denial, angry, depressed. And fortunately, I found a blind psychologist, Dr. Bob, and he had a way with young men, and he helped Jeremy work through his many emotions and finally to acceptance. And honestly, I would encourage anyone whose family is dealing with LHON to consider getting professional support, because just like I didn't know anything about the medical side of LHON, and Dr. Sadoun really clarified things for me, Dr. Bob on the emotional journey, again, was equally knew about the psychology of it, and it was really helpful. Jeremy made it through the emotional abyss just fine. He's now a professional inspirational speaker, and he shares his story to raise awareness of LHON and legal blindness. While finding Dr. Sadoun and Dr. Bob allowed me to stop being Jeremy's LHON doctor and psychologist, roles, like I said, roles that I wasn't qualified to fill, there was still so much that I didn't know and needed to learn quickly. As I found resources and overcame obstacles, I realized others in the LHON community, or people who would probably in the future one day join us, needed the same information, and my friends all said, Lissa, you should write a book. And I wanted to make information available at no cost and be able to change it as I learn more and more. So I created LHON.org, and I started sharing what I was learning, information from Dr. Sadoun and others about the medical side of the disease, assistive technology, orientation mobility, voc rehab, adaptive sports, everything I learned that I thought would be useful, I put on LHON.org. Another thing I put on LHON.org was a contact registry and invited people to make connections. And that's what I learned was that, and as you're all learning today, if you didn't already know it, LHON connections are invaluable. Back when Jeremy was affected 10 years ago, we didn't have Facebook, but there was a small and vibrant LHON Yahoo group. And there I found people who had dealt with LHON and could help us navigate the many challenges we faced. Each person that I met in the LHON community was a wealth of knowledge for me, and I had lots of one-on-one conversations, and then Yahoo group turned into Facebook groups. I started sending out LHON emails to people. We started having phone calls, conference calls. When I traveled for business, I would contact people and see if they wanted to meet up, thinking they're going to think that's weird, and instead they're like, no, this is fun, let's talk. It was great. And that eventually led to the conferences that you heard about. And we've been, doing the conferences for 6 years now. But my point is that I think others in the LHON community are the most valuable resource. The people here absolutely get it, and everyone is just always so willing to share what they've learned with others and make the path a little bit easier. One of the other things I've learned along the way, honestly, is that fundraising is fun. Not long after Jeremy lost vision, a few of his fraternity brothers wanted to do something to help, and we talked to Dr. Sadoun and said, what can we do to be helpful? And he said, well, to move things forward, more money is always important, so to help drive the research, if you can do fundraising, that would be great. So Jeremy and his buddies created what they call the Cure Ride, Cycling Under Reduced Eyesight, and the original goal was to raise funds to support Dr. Sadoun's LHON research, as I said, but what actually happened was magical. The fundraising is important, but the process of doing the fundraising actually turned out to be more magical than the actual funds. And Jeremy's friends who, the first year it was he and a buddy on a tandem bike and 2 others on singles on a support van. And then over the years it's grown to, this year they're gonna do their 10th annual and they'll have 25 of their best buddies. But they ride for 4 days and his friends support him and they care about him and they're raising money to try and help find a cure for him. Dr. Sadoun and his wife put on a barbecue to train the riders. What are they really riding for? So he's given them a brief LHON 101 course. It's amazing. And next month will be the 10th year in a row that he and his friends have gathered. But I would suggest if you want to, as this community is growing, it's helpful to do fundraising for research, for the funds to create conferences like this. And fundraising sounds, ugh, like who wants to do that? But it's actually fun. You can make it fun and people want to support you. And we've, over the years, over the last 10 years, Jeremy and his buddies have raised over $250,000 for LHON research. So it grows, yeah. And the money is important, but like I said, more importantly, his friends have supported him. They've learned what he's dealing with. They've learned about supporting a buddy with a disability, which is an important thing for people to learn, whether they're 19, now they're 29, and they're participating in a cause larger than themselves. As Lissa mentioned, the idea of developing the LHON community did come up through conversation with, there's another doctor in the US, Dr. Nancy Newman. She's at Emory University, and coincidentally, she was a college classmate of mine. She was over doing pre-med, and I was over playing volleyball and doing other things. But it was enough of a connection that many years later, when I realized that she had been working on this disease with Dr. Doug Wallace, who found the 11778 mutation, and they had written paper after paper after paper, I contacted her and told her about our family situation. And I asked, what can I do to help? And she said, well, some people fundraise and some people support families, but what we really need is were a rare disease, and she had just tried to run a clinical trial, and over 2 years they could only find 9 patients, and they had to discontinue the trial. And she said, one day we'll have clinical trials and we'll need to find patients. So she said, make friends, keep track of them, and so that when the day comes, if we have clinical trials, you'll be able to help us get the word out, and maybe people will come find you through LHON.org or Facebook group or something, conferences, and we'll be able to get people to trials, and that's what can really make a difference. So as the group alluded to earlier, that's what I've been doing. She was smart, and she told me what to do, and I followed her directions. So I've been keeping track of people that I've met over the last 10 years, and have kept track of over 7,000 people, and we've built and nurtured we have a global Facebook group which has almost 4,000 people, and if you haven't joined it yet, please find the LHON Global Facebook group and be a part of it, in addition to the Canadian group. In addition to, there's groups for dads of people affected, there's groups for moms of people affected, so there's a variety, women who are affected, there's a variety of groups now. It's gotten bigger and bigger. There's LHON plus varieties of groups. And I send out emails with LHO info, but now there's LHON Canada that you can get information from. So again, things have been growing, right? In the beginning, it was highly non-specific, and then over time, it's gotten much more specific. And so by knowing more people, I think many of you actually experienced this, right? Is that if if somebody has a newly affected 15-year-old, I can connect them with someone else who has a newly affected 15-year-old, where it may be, or someone who has a 15-year-old that was affected a year ago, and we can help people learn from each other. Or inform people about clinical trials, or help them find the right doctors. And like someone mentioned earlier, informing family members. Heaven forbid, you don't want anyone else in your family to become affected, but because this has a genetic component, it is so helpful to inform family. And so if you can alert your maternal family and bring them into the community, and hey, it's a great place, right? This is a fun group, so bringing people into a fun group makes it easier, and then if you're a part of it, you're more educated, you're more aware, and then you know where to go if you need help down the road. Globally, it's exciting how over the last 10 years I've watched and been a part of LHON growing around the world. The screen has pictures of some of the countries where there's different Facebook groups. Some of them are just Facebook groups. Some have meetings like this one. For instance, in France, they have a group called Ouvrir les yeux, and they've been going for, golly, they had been having meetings for like 5 or 6 years before we started doing it in the US. Germany, the picture's too small, but in the upper right-hand corner, the German group happened to have their meeting in in Germany the same day we had ours in Nashville. So they all stood in front of a screen and said, hello, Nashville, sort of sending greetings to us. The Swedish group had their first meeting several years ago, and they had me Skype into it. The UK group got going a few years ago. They'd come to, several of them had come to our conferences. So it's just, there's more to it, right? There's this Canada group, but there's a group the group in the US isn't really US, it's just that's where we have the meetings, but people come from anywhere and everywhere, and everyone's invited. Brazil just announced they're having a conference in December. So again, it's growing. There's more of us globally, and the interconnections are powerful. I wanted to mention Elena actually is here, and her sister runs the group in Italy. So, I mean, there's not borders, right? We have family in other countries, and the countries and the groups and the people and the families cross borders. So we're really sort of part of the whole global effort. In terms of how I've approached LHON, I wasn't as patient as the folks here in Canada. I didn't take the time to organize a group per se, and I absolutely applaud the group in Canada for setting up a nonprofit. It's a major undertaking. I didn't want to take the time to build and maintain an LHON organization. I wanted to jump right in and conduct a bunch of activities. So I tried to find an existing organization that would make sense to collaborate with. And LHON, as you were hearing earlier, it's a mitochondrial disorder. And there's a group called the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, and they work with the hundreds of mitochondrial diseases. So it seemed like the logical choice, even though most of the content at their conference has to do with issues and diseases very different from ours, body systems that tend to be affected differently. So the first one that I went to didn't have anything to do with vision, but I approached them and suggested collaborating and working together. And they absolutely agreed. And so we've been working together ever since. And so they have an annual symposium where they bring together researchers, clinicians, and patients involved with mitochondrial disease, which means just like the Canadian group set this day up in alignment with an ophthalmology conference that was alluded to earlier. So for instance, Dr. Sadoun was already in town. So it was easier to have a luminary like him at this meeting. UMDF, same thing. They have some luminaries in the mitochondrial space, and doing a meeting with them makes a lot of good sense. And so in the first 5 years of having the LHON conference in the US, and many of you have attended it, so you know how it works. But for the first 5 years, we did our own thing sort of off to the side. And then this year, we actually did it differently, where we integrated half of a day with the full mitochondrial community, partially to expose the broad mitochondrial community to the specific issues of the LHON group, and for them to see the exciting things that are happening in the realms of therapeutic efforts in our space, which maybe some of the other mitochondrial diseases aren't enjoying, and just for them to for us to understand, for the LHON community to learn more about mitochondria in general. In terms of results, as I said, I think we've done a great job of connecting potential participants with trials. I was at the ophthalmology meeting yesterday, and Dr. Newman was there, and she was telling the ophthalmologists, that after having had to abandon that trial 15 years ago because she could only recruit 9 patients over the course of 2 years for a particular trial, by contrast, you'll hear discussion upcoming about some trials that have gotten fully recruited quite quickly, and a lot of that does come from having people in the community and being able to connect potential participants with trials. We've supported LHON research, we've developed the database, working constantly on education and awareness of LHON through LHON.org. Videos from the conferences over the last 6 years are posted online, which I think, I used to tell people you have to see Dr. Sadoun. Not everyone could travel there. Now you have other people to visit. Now we have lectures like this are being videoed today, and I've been doing that for 6 years, so that helps. There's reference on this slide to a genealogy project, and somebody asked earlier how to tell family members. And if you look on the umdf.org/LHON page, one of the video sets you'll find is about a genealogy project that we did because I was trying to answer the question of how do you tell family members about LHON. It's a difficult topic, and I got a grant for a genealogy project, and I engaged a professional genealogist, and she worked with several families in the community to do their family trees, and then gave them contact information to contact their maternal relatives to tell them about LHON, but they had trouble having those conversations, so I engaged a genetic counselor, and she created some videos about how to tell your family members this difficult but important information, because I just believe strongly that 10 years ago, nobody wanted to tell their family, and there was no reason to, and that's what a lot of people think. So hopefully these tools change that, because there is a reason to tell family members. As you heard, there are things one can do proactively so that people don't become affected. Well, that's really important information to share. So here's tools about how to share that difficult information. And if sharing it, even if it's difficult, if the outcome is you've protected a family member, well, then it was worth having that difficult conversation. So that's a support tool, or genetic counselors can help with that. And then obviously the support is so important. As I mentioned, there are so many Facebook groups out there now, which is sort of our main means of ongoing support. Plus, we meet up when we can. We do monthly calls. We have the conferences and just a lot of individual connections. Personal results. As I mentioned, when my son was affected, I was, worried. How would the family evolve? And hey, worked out well. This is a photo of my son who got married last May to a lovely, lovely woman, Ellen. And my kids have all grown up and very happy family. He's a professional inspirational speaker, as I said. He's a blind golf champion. Julie and Eric, my other kids, they're absolutely aware of their LHON risk, but they don't dwell on it. And my daughter, Julie, if you talk to her about does she worry about passing on the mutation to her future children? She's like, well, what's the worst that can happen? They'll be like Jeremy, he's cool, that was my goal 10 years ago. I want there either to be a treatment or a cure, and we're not there yet. So at least if I can't get there, let's at least make it that she's not afraid of it and sees an example of someone living a great life. In terms of future objectives with LHON, again, I hope we can continue to connect potential participants with trials, keep supporting LHON research, continue to raise awareness of LHON and educate people. One of my pet subjects, as you sort of heard alluded to earlier, is this notion that I talk to so many people. And so many people tell me, oh, I got diagnosed X number of years ago and they told me women don't get affected. Don't worry about the women. And then the women get affected. So we need to change that. So I'm working with Dr. Kranja and others to raise awareness of less common LHON situations. Children, people say don't worry about children. Yeah, but unless it's your child, and then you need to worry about it and be aware of it. Non-ocular symptoms. I have a friend here who's highly involved in all issues related to LHON+, and we like each other and we talk a lot, and so I can never forget about non-ocular issues, LHON+, whatever you want to call it. LHON support, there's ad hoc ways of supporting people, and then there's more structured ways, and I'm hoping to move us from an ad hoc way to structured ways, and there's been start on a system and want to do more. Growing the organizations. Obviously what's happening today is exciting. What's happening here in Canada. As I mentioned, Brazil has their first conference set for December. We've been meeting with people from Australia trying to get them to integrate LHON more into what their MITO community does. And then further in terms of growing LHON capabilities, at the close of our 2017 LHON conference, a young woman approached me and asked if I needed any help for the work I'm doing for LHON. Turns out her name is Molly Knox. Molly's parents had graciously hosted Jeremy and several others when he'd been giving a speech in Connecticut not long before. Jeremy had returned from Connecticut saying, Mom, I want to be John Knox when I grow up. He's cool. I'm like, okay, that's good. And then soon thereafter, I was in Boston and met up with Molly. And we had a great meeting, and I thought, oh man, she's great. She can be super helpful, I think, but let me just check. So my daughter was in Boston at the time, and she and Jeremy was in town for a meeting, and I said, well, go meet Molly, see what you think. And they just came back, and they're like, oh my Mom, don't let her get away. She's super. She can be really, really helpful to the community. So for the last year and more, actually, every week we hop on the phone, figure out how to move the LHON project forward in a variety of ways. And she's been a huge asset and addition to the forces at work on behalf of LHON. And I'd like her to share a bit of her story with you now.
Thank you, Lissa, and thank you so much to the LHON Canada team for putting together this terrific event. As a native Canadian myself, it is always a pleasure to visit the nation's capital, and it's wonderful to meet so many new folks in the LHON community this weekend. Again, my name is Molly Knox, and I am the daughter of an affected dad. This is my dad and I on the screen here, John Knox, and he's had LHON for over 40 years, and he is here today along with my mom and my aunts, my uncle, and he will also be speaking this afternoon. People ask sometimes what it was like growing up with a dad with LHON, and if I felt like there were things that I missed out on, or if I ever felt like it impacted our relationship. I always say the same thing. My dad was truly the best child a dad could ever have, and still is, and the only thing that ever seemed out of place to me was how abnormal I found it when friends of mine were picked up by their dad in the car. I remember thinking how weird those people were, and that was something we did not do in our house. So to answer the question, no, LHON never got in the way of my relationship with my dad. And I sometimes wonder if, in fact, it even played a role in bringing us as close as we are. After discovering LHON.org and the monthly LHON live calls in 2015, my dad willingly began to join in on the calls and started to become acquainted with folks in the community. My involvement with the community was initially limited as it was a busy time in my life, but we decided as a family to attend the 2017 conference in DC. After meeting so many wonderful people, hearing many incredible stories from community members, listening to promising scientific updates throughout the conference, and watching the way Lissa flawlessly led the event, I was determined to become more involved in the community, so I approached Lissa. As Lissa said, we have been in touch nearly every week over the past year, and it has been a privilege to work alongside someone who is so competent and passionate. I've had the opportunity to be involved in a variety of projects over the past year, including the development of an online support tool and assistance with clinical trial recruitment. I've gotten to know so many folks in the community through Facebook chatting or phone calls. I was able to observe some amazing LHON athletes earlier this year along the course of the 2018 Boston Marathon, and I got a nice group together for the Energy for Life walk in May in New England. And so you know, Energy for Life walks are organized by the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation to promote awareness, funding, and research for those suffering from mitochondrial diseases. In addition to helping with preparation for the June 2018 conference in Nashville, I also had the privilege of giving a presentation on sports and fitness options for folks with LHON. The conference was a blast, and I am already very excited for next year. I strongly encourage anyone who is willing and able to get involved in whatever capacity in the global LHON community to do so. It is an incredibly rewarding experience to support such a special group of people, and I look forward to many more years of collaborating with Lissa and supporting this community. One final thing I'd like to mention, I think it was mentioned earlier that if you are interested in an audio file of the book Unblinded, please come and see me. I have a special individual code that I can set you up with and some instructions, so please feel free to approach me and I can get you set up with that. I just want to make sure to get that out there. And now I'd like to turn it back to Lissa for some closing remarks.